Good evening and a happy President's Day to you, and a welcome to this special edition of RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this Monday evening, February 17th. Well, tonight we dedicate our broadcast to that select group of 44 American men, the few who have been called President of the United States. And coming up, we'll replay a special look back at the legacy of the last president to come from New York, none other than Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But we begin with a little presidential history. As we air this on President's Day of 2014, Barack Obama, he has a little more than 1,000 days left in his second and final term. Second terms are tricky things for our presidents. They are, in general, less successful than the first terms. Now, for some presidents, second terms have been downright disastrous. And for more, we turn to our presidential historian, Yannick Michkowski. He's the chair of the History Department at Dowling College on Long Island, and he writes about presidential history as well, authoring Gerald Ford and the Challenges of the 1970s and Eisenhower's Sputnik Moment. And he is joined tonight by our regular panelist, Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, and our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman. Gentlemen, Yannick, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
okay, let's talk about the second term curse, if you will. More often than not, do things go worse than better for second term presidents?
More often, presidents do have trouble in their second term. Usually it's in the form of decreased political capital or scandal. You had Richard Nixon with Watergate, Ronald Reagan and Iran-Contra, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. So they have lots of problems. There's a history of trouble for presidents in their second term.
And some of it's the political landscape, forgetting the scandals, et cetera. I mean, we were talking before, guys, but the second year of the second term, the sixth year for the presidency, they usually lose 30 seats to the opposition party just in the House. And that's a trend, right? The political capital, they don't have as much. It gets old a little bit, right?
Yeah, it makes it especially more difficult for them to work on domestic issues, to push their domestic agenda forward. That's why you see a lot of presidents starting to shift their vision toward foreign policy in their second term, like Reagan going to the Soviet Union, concluding the INF treaty with Gorbachev, Clinton trying to mediate the Middle East problems in his second term as well.
And we know in the next month, guys, this president, he's going to be going to 3 different continents, even possibly a 4th. Like all, he's going to try and get into the Middle East. It seems that happens in every second term here. He's also going to have, obviously, some issues that may not even be on his radar that will still come up. But give us the best and worst here. Presidents who turned it around in their second terms that faced crises, and presidents that never got the mojo back in those final 4 years.
In the 20th century, I think Theodore Roosevelt and Dwight D. Eisenhower had some decent second terms. Theodore Roosevelt got the Meat Inspection Act and the Food and Drug Act passed. He started real work on environmentalism, which is one of his great legacies as president. And then Eisenhower was able to establish NASA, get ICBMs and IRBMs in place for national defense, and continue building the interstate system. So those are pretty decent second terms. Worst are things like Richard Nixon having to resign from office.
Yeah.
How and why were Teddy Roosevelt and Eisenhower able to succeed in second terms where other presidents haven't seemed to be able to get out of their own way?
I think a lot of it was having clear focus, having a clear set of priorities, what they wanted to accomplish, and a limited metric of what they want to do instead of scattering their efforts across the board. They both had very good relations with Congress. Eisenhower in particular was able to work with Congress, work with Lyndon Johnson as the majority leader, and he didn't care so much who got the credit for things like establishing NASA or the National Defense Education Act. The credit often went to Lyndon Johnson and the Democrats in the Senate. And to Eisenhower, that was just fine, as long as he did something that he felt was good for the country.
Is it also as simple as who they surround themselves? I remember when Barack Obama got here, one of the first things he said was, I will not live in a bubble. I'm not going to be like the predecessors in this office where I'm just surrounded by a tight circle of people who only tell me what I want to hear. I want to get out there. I want to know what's going on. And seemingly like all the predecessors, he gets more and more insular, the same folks. Is it important for these guys to bring in new blood, to change around their cabinet here, to, if not change their agenda, to keep things at least from getting stale?
Yeah, one of the problems in second term is just exhaustion, physical exhaustion and exhaustion of ideas. And so it is important in that respect to bring in new people. There is one downside to that in that the second term people are seen sort of like the second string. You have your first string who have gone or resigned or left, and then the second, these are sort of the second rate players, and they're not perceived as being as capable. But it is important nonetheless to bring in fresh blood and new ideas for a president to fight off that exhaustion.
Yeah,
is there a fatigue factor that sets in either from Congress or from the general public? I mean, you've seen Barack Obama on your screen for 6 years now. We saw George Bush for 8 years. After a while, does it just start to get a little stale? That might be the wrong term.
Yeah, no, that's a very good analogy. I mean, a television program, I think the viewership sort of fades after 5, 6, 7 years.
Don't say that.
Well, but we only get to see TV programs maybe at most 5 nights a week with the evening news, or once a week with a TV series. The president's there 24/7 really, and there is a sense of fatigue in the public, in the media, especially after the 6th, 7th year. The media and the public are looking for the next election.
And the way our media works is we're always looking for the next big thing. And with politics, we're already talking about 2016. As much as we hate doing it or try to resist it, and it started 6 months ago. I mean, think about it. All the jockeying, all the posturing. And if you look at the congressional calendar, they're already positioning themselves for the midterms. And then they're going to do nothing to try and advance, obviously, this president's agenda, depending on their own political agendas. So in many ways, you got a 5th year. If you're lucky, depending on how the political calendar is moving, maybe a 6th year. Who knows what he can do in his last couple of years, right?
Identical. I couldn't agree with you more. But you know what? I know we've got to toss to a break, Richard. But what I'm curious about, presidents, they're smart people. They talk to people like you, and they know that history says in the second terms, they tend to get in trouble. So then why can't they avoid that trouble, knowing that history shows in term number 2 they're in trouble?
Well, one thing in terms of avoiding things is avoiding scandal. Just the absence of scandal helps elevate a president's stature and keeps their administration with some sense of credibility. So projecting some integrity in office is very important for presidents.
And to be fair to this president, he really hasn't had scandals that have defined so many. I mean, just think to the last Democratic presidency, obviously, with Lewinsky and all the other assorted scandals that some of the predecessors in term 2 faced. Okay, we come back. Reevaluating presidents. It's a great parlor game here for presidential historians, but folks who might have left with a lower grade get a higher one upon reflection. And some here, when they left here to loving kudos, when history takes a look back, maybe the love a little bit, well, let's just say not as justified. We're going to get into all of that, where the admiration is or isn't deserved, coming up next.